welcome everyone to Associations Creating Community. This is our podcast in which we talk about how associations can create, maintain, support, develop communities. We go to a lot of different places, and this is a really important one today. I'm Jefferson Glassy. I'm a partner and former co-chair of the Whiteford Law Firm's associations, nonprofit organizations, and political organizations practice group. And I'm really excited about being able to talk about this topic today. And by this topic, I mean this. I got this in the, sorry, it's a little weird there. It's blurring out.
Yeah, more back towards your face. There you go.
So this came across email and my head exploded. The time is now, association, resilience, and adaptation, and the Anthropocene, is that the way you say that?
Mm-hmm.
Anthropocene climate disruption. And it's about a 50-page white paper on climate issues for associations. And it is really, really fantastic. I mean, everybody should go out and read it and do something about it, because this is issue number one to me. So we have today the authors of this amazing white paper, Elizabeth Engel and Shelly Alcorn, and I'm just going to ask them to sort of give a quick intro of Elizabeth. You could start first, a little quick intro, and then Shelly, and then I'll start off and see if I can come up with a very incisive question or two.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for hosting us, first of all, Jefferson. We really appreciate it. So yes, as Jefferson mentioned, my name's Elizabeth Engel. I've been in the association industry since the mid-90s, and for the last 11 and a half years or so, I've been running a business called Spark Consulting, where I provide membership strategy consulting exclusively for associations. One of the things that I do with the business is a series of white papers. Shelly and I have collaborated a couple of times before, and this latest one is about the role that associations can play in addressing climate change. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute once Shelly introduces herself.
Well, thank you, Jefferson, again for having us. My name is Shelly Alcorn. I've been involved in the association community both in California and nationwide since the early 90s. And I am a principal futurist with Michelle Alcorn and Associates, and I look at large trends that associations need to be talking about when they're reviewing their strategy and building community within their organizations. So that's what I'm doing here.
Well, this is certainly one of those that's important. You know, I view this, and this is just personally, as well, first of all, I mean, I'm a big believer in associations and their communities. It's so important. Associations are, you know, there's one for every industry, cause, and profession around the world. And so association managers, association executives are really kind of like on top of the world, and they're experts at governance and leading, managing industries and education and certification and standards and so many things. You know, they're rock stars to me. I'm just a lawyer. So, but I think association executives are amazing. I believe in associations, and community is so important. So what more important community is there than the human community on Earth and all of our non-human relatives out there? And no matter what you believe about climate, whether it's changing, whether you think it's changing or what it's caused by or whatever, something is happening, and we need to really deal with it. My friend Jeff DeCagna at the ASE annual meeting had a session about I forget what the number was, the 6 things that all association boards have to be discussing. And most of them dealt with climate. And so that sort of just reaffirmed my belief that this is not just some side issue. This is not some random issue. This affects everybody. And ASAE and all of the associations, large and small, really have a stake in this. And this white paper explained the issues around climate for you and me, for all of us, but also focused on associations and what associations, how climate is affecting associations, and how the things that associations can do, begin to do, and even start talking about doing. So that's just my quick intro into this, but I'd love it if Elizabeth, perhaps you could give a bit of an overview and comment on that. I mean, this is the biggest community issue that we have, I think. And thank you so much for you and Shelly doing this white paper to put it out there. It's really great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So, one of the things that I wanted to pick up on that you just kind of touched on a little bit, Jefferson, is the idea that climate change has, for a lot of us, been a moral imperative for quite some time. And so we see that in the types of choices that we make in our own lives every day. You know, the kinds of things that people can do related to recycling and composting and looking into electric vehicles and local advocacy, all that kind of good stuff. But one of the things that became really apparent to Shelly and me as we started looking into this is that climate change has moved to becoming a business imperative for organizations. And one of the most sort of obvious examples of that is as we think about our conventions and annual meetings when we're looking to gather people in person. And as many of you are probably already aware, a lot of the cities that are very popular conference destinations are also very much at risk of climate impacts. So when we think about places in California, places in the desert Southwest, New Orleans,
Acapulco.
Miami,
Acapulco.
yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
We think about some of these places where we like to go to host events because people like to visit them, and they are some of the most vulnerable places in our country and in some cases on the planet with regards to the effects of climate change. So this becomes a business imperative for associations to look at what's going on, to be aware of what's going on, to be knowledgeable about what's going on so that we can prepare for it, either by developing resilience, which is the ability to bounce back after something bad has happened. Or to adapt, which is, the ways that we live and work and travel and relate to each other and exist on this planet are changing. And we may have to change some of the things about the ways we do all of those things in order to respond.
Yeah, it's so important. Shelly?
Yeah, when we look at the power of associations and the power of community, really, when it comes to the types of changes that need to be made, governments aren't going to do it. There are individuals can't do it on our own. Really, it's that mid-level of associations and those types of communities who are knowledgeable about their sphere, but also have relationships outside of their sphere that can really start making independent decisions that are best for them and their internal operations, that ensures that their member-facing programs and services are helpful and not harmful, and that they may need to add to those services like mental health counseling and disaster recovery and other types of things that they may not have thought of before. And then also making changes in their industries and professions so that we can collectively rise to the occasion. And I can't think of a group of organizations that are better suited for that than the association community.
Yeah,
And
and I
yeah,
re
and one
go
thing I
ahead.
one thing I would note there, I would put a caveat on something Shelley just said, which is governments can't do it alone.
Right,
You know,
right.
I there and one of the things that tends to happen when we think about responding to climate change is we tend to see things either at the very, very large scale of sort of, international organizations like the UN, right? Like, the community, the Conference of Parties, COP28, the UN Annual Climate Summit just finished. And, so the UN has to fix this. everything's going to happen at the UN level. Or conversely, it's all about me and my own individual consumer choices. Do I get, a hybrid car or an electric car? Do I stick with a gas car? Like, do I switch my house over to having a heat pump, whatever? And those, yes, absolutely, things need to happen at both of those levels. But as Shelly pointed out, there's that whole middle in there, everything from multinational groups, national governments, state and provincial governments, local governments, other types of community organizations, and in fact, the association industry, where a lot of the group effort that's going to have to go into this is going to have to take place.
Now, Shelly, I remember you said that you called yourself, how do you pronounce it? An apocalyptimist?
Yeah, an apocalyptimist. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I fall in that category. I follow Twitter, a lot of climate scientists and important people, and their hair's on fire.
Mhm.
It's like, well, we may not survive into 2070 as a human species, that sort of a thing. And people think, oh, of course, that couldn't happen. Well, how many societies have collapsed? You read Jared Diamond's
Most of
book,
them
Collapse.
in history.
The dinosaurs say hi.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is, but it's just so hard to focus on. So perhaps, Elizabeth, say that you're association exec watching this, and you want to figure out, how is this important to me? Why is it important? What should I be doing? Why, how does this affect the community in my association? Maybe you could touch on a couple things that maybe in the white paper that you want to say, and then Shelly too, to help folks really get that this is critical.
Well, and in fact, that's one of the things that is common about all the collaborative white papers that I've produced over the years of running the business, is that, I want to give you the theories, the big ideas, like the whole why does this matter and why should I care piece of whatever it is that I'm writing about, in this case, climate change. But I also want to leave you with, okay, you've convinced me. Now, what do I do? I want to make sure that I've answered that question for you. You don't leave the white paper going, oh, oh God, we need to do something, but I have no idea what to do. Right. And so, Shelly had mentioned 3 levels at which association community operates earlier, which I think are it's really key to sort of understanding how to think about developing resilience and adapting as we look at climate change. And that is, we've got the community of associations as an industry, where we all come together as association executives. And there are things that are common about our industry, qua the industry. Then within each association, there's also your specific community of members and customers, who you have those sort of very direct relationships with, and also where you help them build relationships with each other. And then there's the larger industry or profession that your association exists to serve. And we offer concrete ideas in the white paper at all of those levels for things that you can do. So for instance, one of the things that Shelly had talked about was the issue of mental health. Very well known, lots of studies out there. We cite several of them in the white paper about the impact that the ongoing climate crisis is having, particularly on the mental health of younger workers, and in our case, members. And it's significant. Something like 3/4 of Gen Z surveyed, feel that the issue of climate change has an extremely negative impact on their mental health. And one of the numbers that really jumped out at me is something like 40% of them are anticipating that the climate crisis will strongly impact their decision about whether or not to have children. I mean, that's a pretty big deal if 40% of young people are thinking, things are getting bad enough that I might not want to bring another life into this situation. And so that's a significant mental health burden for your members, for your staff. And so, you need to be aware of that, and provide space for them to process their thoughts and emotions around this, and also provide supports for them. Now, one way that can look is actually one of the case studies that we have in the white paper, It's an organization called Stand Earth. They are a membership organization, but they are on the front lines of climate advocacy. They work to get companies out of fossil fuels and also to protect old growth forests. So their staff are actually on the front lines of climate work, and have had people both attack them verbally and also physically in some cases. And so Stand Earth has placed an enormous priority on providing supports for their staff, which is all the typical things that you might think of around excellent healthcare and employee assistance programs and generous leave and all that kind of thing. But they've done some other things that are really creative, everything from some additional supports for folks around racial and climate justice, because there is definitely in a list issues of environmental equity that different communities deal with, and also things like a mindfulness and meditation practice. Just as an example of a way that you can do that. And I know I've been going on rather long, so I will turn it over to Shelly to talk maybe a little bit about some of the member facing and industry stuff.
Sure. Something that I think is important for CEOs, senior staff members, association personnel, is to go through the mental and emotional and intellectual process of taking this information in, right? There is no lack of information out there that comes from reputable scientists with all of the explanations you could possibly ask for, just sitting there for the taking. But it's very hard, number one, for us to read it, to do our homework, to confront the truth. The truth is uncomfortable. And I continue to go back to, this idea of, the serenity prayer, that's like, accept the things you can't change, courage to change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think as an association professional, it's too easy for us to avoid these issues because we feel like they're political, or we feel like our members will be upset if we engage in this activity, et cetera, et cetera. But really, everybody knows in the back of their mind that something's off, right? Everybody knows it. The fires, the extreme weather events, the atmospheric rivers, the increased temperature that we had, this incredible spike we had over this last 6 months, crossing up over 2 degrees for 2 months, which is something that was never supposed to happen. We had the Paris Agreement. Why isn't it 1.5? So you have to confront it. You have to take it in, and then you have to take action. But you don't have to take action all at once, even though the problem is urgent, because sometimes people go too big at first and they think, I'm going to have to get a statement from my board on climate change, or I'm going to have to wait till my next strategic planning session to talk about climate change and strategy. No. You need to start now with whatever you can do, whether it's your internal operations, maybe it's reduction of office space, reduction of your carbon footprint. Maybe it's hybrid work schedules. Maybe it's work from home so that you don't have employees, supporting air conditioning at home for their animals and air conditioning in the office. There's lots of things you can do as an organization internally. Divest from fossil fuels. Call your investment broker. Make the decision like we did in the 90s to move away from investing in big tobacco. Make the decision. This is something we can do. Talk to your legislative affairs people. I know we're only talking about our industries, but in fact, we are talking about our members' livelihoods and their lives as well. So you have lobbyists. We spend more than the fossil fuel industry does on lobbyists every year. And yet we aren't driving the conversation on climate change. Excuse me. So, there's lots of things that you can do that we outline in the white paper. But more importantly, it's that psychological barrier that you have to burst through so that you can look at your organization holistically, then your members' programs, and then industries and professions as well. So start with a task force. Find the people inside your organization who are concerned about it. Let them talk. give them a platform, allow them to communicate, allow them to do research, and then let's communicate to other association CEOs. Because there are a lot of association CEOs out there who are doing things, but because they don't have a platform to talk about it, they're talking about it in their vertical. They're not reaching out to the larger community. We're inviting everybody in to have this conversation together between organizations, between individuals, between industries and professions. And that's hopefully what an association CEO can do to really start activating the kinds of change and the kind of action that is absolutely required, and required not on a decade time frame, not on an 8-year, 5-year time frame. It's a time frame that starts today.
And in fact, it's entirely possible to do well while doing good. So neither of these are case studies in the white paper. They're folks I've talked to since it came out. But the floral industry is looking at use of plastic across the industry, because there's a lot of plastic that's used in the floral industry, and they're like, A, this is costing us money, and B, it's not super sustainable. What can we do to reduce this? Another great example is chain link fences. They've been able to do well by while doing good, related to, from a purely sort of business perspective. They're like, well, we want to make sure that our stuff is appealing to people. Our products are appealing to people. Let's get LEED certified. And in fact, metal fencing is surprisingly sustainable. And they've been able to get a lot of their supply chain LEED certified. So again, there's opportunities to do the right thing, but also have it have a positive impact on the bottom line for your association, the association itself, or for the members of the profession or industry you serve. And one of the things that's come up in conversations as we've been talking with folks about the white paper and what can happen is exactly what Shelly just highlighted, is there's all these pockets of innovation happening in the association industry, but there's not really a place for the community, the association community, the association executive community to come together and say, hey, this is what we're doing. If this information would benefit other people, feel free to take it. And, B, here's a challenge that we're facing. Has anybody else faced this? And do you have a good solution? And so, what we're hoping that we can build around this white paper is a community of association execs who are somewhere along the journey to dealing with this issue, to dealing with climate change, with their internal operations, with their member facing work, or in their professions and industries, where they can just share what they've got, share what they've been doing, and learn from each other.
Yeah, the idea of a community of practice, which is,
Yeah,
I think, what you were
absolutely.
floating and talking about. Associations are unbelievable at within their specific silo, industry profession, at working with people, developing education, sharing best practices. I mean, that's what it's all about. And so it's important, I think, for association execs to think about climate as affecting their own association, as you've discussed, and their own members and their members' businesses and all that. But the associations are kind of a unique animal that, probably, I mean, we work together through ASAE. We probably could work together more on some things. And, I would, and anyway, the idea of a community of practice. So I think that is something that I really hope that people take up on. And how do you sort of suggest that happen? You're putting the white paper out, you're having conversations, but what would you throw out there in terms of how do you develop a community of practice around this important issue?
Well, that's exactly what we're working on right now. And it's interesting that you had mentioned the whole idea of sharing of good practices. For a while earlier in my career, I worked for a consulting company that did more work in kind of the fundraising, cause-oriented nonprofit space, but they had some association clients, and one of the things that they were shocked by in our community is how willing everybody is to share information with each other. And I said, well, the reason for that is because associations for the most part are not directly competing with each other. Fundraising organizations kind of are, because like there's a certain percentage of the population that's going to give money to causes, and there's a certain amount of money that they're going to give. And so if your organization over there gets more of that pie, that might mean that there's less of it for me. Associations are not in that kind of situation. And because of that, we do have this wonderful opportunity to share good practices amongst each other, and lift those up. The other thing is we literally exist to solve problems. The whole reason that people associate in the first place is because there's something that they wanted to accomplish, usually professionally, but sometimes personally as well. Either a problem they wanted to solve, a goal they wanted to achieve that they were unable to do on their own. So they come together as a group to try to accomplish that thing. And so, Shelly and I are in the process with the third leg of the stool, who was unable to be with us here today, Maddie Grant,
Yeah.
thinking through what that might look like, for associations to come together to share good practices and help each other solve challenges, particularly related to climate change. And we don't want to be we don't want to come from a place of telling the community, we know what you should do, and we're going to tell you how this whole thing's going to run, and we're going to arrange the whole thing, and you just do what we say. We're hoping to truly build a community that decides that together. And so we have some ideas about resource sharing, the white paper being one of those resources, of course. But resource sharing, creating a space where people can come and ask questions, of course, and get answers, but also potentially truly form a community of practice around, we have a project that we would like to work on together, potentially related to one of those key three areas, something about the industry, and internal operations, something about that's member facing, or even, as we're looking at our professions and industries, we want to put together a cohort to work on this, and to help answer some questions, come to some solutions, and potentially create something that other organizations can use. So yeah, well, come if that sounds appealing to you, come join us.
Yeah. And this is a porous boundary. We don't believe we have the answers. We believe collectively we have the answers. We don't believe that we as individuals have the answers. And I had a wonderful conversation yesterday with Climate Wise Associations, which is a group in Australia who's working with Australian associations on climate policy and really trying to develop resources for associations. There are groups in Europe, there's groups in Canada who are really starting to engage in this. And we're welcoming all comers and creating a safe space to have that discussion. Because honestly, it is easy for people to read the white paper and say, oh, Shelly Elizabeth, oh, doomers, me in particular, it's like, oh, you're taking this so seriously, you're nuts, this isn't going to happen, blah, 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 science, whatever. And the fact is a lot of us have avoided going public with our concerns because it hasn't been safe for us to do so. Regardless of what the science has said. Now that you see scientists gluing themselves to buildings and going on Twitter and saying, oh my God, please listen to us. When you see James Hansen producing the works he's producing and you see what's happening in the scientific community, you can't possibly stay on the sidelines with what it is that they know and they're telling us every day. It's just, it doesn't break through our media. It doesn't break through this constant noise that we're surrounded by. So, feel free to come and be overwhelmed. It's okay. We still have to move forward. We still have to be resilient. We still have to be adaptive. We still have to network together as professionals and have conversations with each other. That is the secret to creating resilient communities in local areas and nationwide and internationally.
Yeah, and we shouldn't avoid those conversations. I was somewhere recently and started talking a little politics, and people were like, well, maybe we shouldn't talk about politics. I'm like, how can we not talk about the most important thing, how we govern ourselves and what's going on? So maybe sort of close to wrapping up, but I'd like to kind of raise this last point. I mean, first of all, let's develop this community of practice. Anybody out there listening, please, this is important. And I think it's important from this perspective too. There's been a lot of more focus recently on sort of indigenous thinking and the effects on the first peoples and the colonizers and everything that we've lost. And one of the elders I like to listen to, Oren Lyons of the Onondaga tribe, he's Haudenosaunee, faith keeper, I think, something. He said, well, the elders got together, talked about climate, and what our statement is the ice is melting. And so this is really the time to think maybe more a little indigenous-y, that respect, that thinking 7 generations down the road. This is the time for, I believe, really kind of utmost effort to try to figure this out. But it's also kind of a responsibility in Braiding Sweetgrass. Robin Wall-Kimmerer's book, she talks about the responsibilities and the perspective of gratitude, et cetera, that Indigenous people have. And so isn't this kind of a situation where, we're all so privileged, particularly in the United States? I mean, all these things we have. I was in the Amazon rainforest a couple of weeks ago, and tell you, we don't need all this stuff to live. But since we do have all this, we have the privileges of where we live as associations. We have the privileges of what we can do, the opportunities that we can really make changes. And so I'd like to ask both of you about what are the obligations? I mean, don't we really, I kind of think there's no rights without responsibilities. We really need to think about our grandchildren. And this is really important. So do you have maybe a perspective on that for association executives, maybe young association executives, as to how we can sort of take a bite of this big challenge? You just start small, but we know that we can do it if we work together. Don't we have to do something about this, Elizabeth?
Well, yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the Indigenous perspective and Robin Wall-Kimmerer, because of course Braiding Sweetgrass was one of our source materials for the white paper, and we do highlight some of her thinking about that. And not being Indigenous myself, I don't want to try to speak to that perspective too much, other than to say it's definitely worth engaging with in a significant way, because it is a different way of viewing our relationship with each other, with the other human and non-human creatures around us, with the world as a whole. So I definitely highly encourage people to do a little bit of reading and thinking there. But Jefferson, to one of your points that we don't need all this stuff. One of the things that those of us, particularly in high income nations, tend to get a little freaked out about, in thinking about the kinds of changes that are happening and the kinds of changes we might have to make in our own lives, is, oh God, we're going to have to, devolve back to some sort of subsistence economy, like people had in the Middle Ages when, everybody died at, 17 years old because you got a paper cut and it got infected, and that was the end of you, right? And so one of the people that we quote in the white paper, that we reference in the white paper, is a woman named Rebecca Solnit. She's a writer and historian. She recently edited an anthology titled "Not Too Late: Changing the Climate Story from Despair to Possibility," and she talks a lot about this whole idea of, what is true abundance. And right now, certainly for those of us in high income countries, we have a lot of material abundance. And even when you look worldwide, the level of extreme poverty worldwide has decreased dramatically in, say, the last 15 years or so. So human beings right now, writ large, have the highest standard of living we ever have. And and that's material abundance. And her point is, yeah, but our lives are impoverished in a lot of other ways, because when you think about what makes for a meaningful life, it's not stuff. It's having meaningful work. It's having meaningful relationships. It's being in right relationship to the people around you, and it's being in relationship with nature. And it's having those kinds of connections, those communities around you. And none of that requires stuff. And so, one of the things that in thinking about how the world could be different, because that's a piece of this, is having a vision for ways that the world can be different, that life can be different, that we can live differently, that we can be in relationship with each other differently, is to do exactly that, and to think, hey, maybe what we're living in now is actually the scarcity, because we're missing a lot of those other types of pieces of connection, of community, of relationship, and the abundance is what's to come.
Yeah, and
Yes.
there's so much that we can learn from the indigenous communities, and they've been telling us. Like, like it's hubris and greed and avarice and acquisition and and conquering
Hierarchy.
and all sorts of behaviors that have gotten us to this place. But it's not like we haven't been warned. And I think that there's so much, and like I said, like Elizabeth said as well, we don't speak on behalf of that community, but we want to elevate their voices as much as possible, because they show us an alternative way of being in relationship. When you talk about community, there's a different way to be in relationship with life writ large, whether it's plant life, animal life, human life, that we could choose if we would simply put down the dollar, and think that that was the only value that we can create are these imaginary numbers, and I believe it was a Cree proverb that I go back to a lot, which is, when the last tree is cut down, the last fish eaten, and the last stream poisoned, you'll realize you cannot eat money. And I think that the reckoning has arrived. The reckoning has arrived. The consequences are coming. A lot of this is already baked into the climate system, and we're just not seeing it yet, but the scientists know it's coming. So if we're going to choose new ways of life and new ways of being in relationship with each other, well, then let's do that. And it starts with honesty and truth-telling and searching and acknowledging the other and acknowledging that we don't know, and that whatever it is that we do, we're attempting to preserve the best and purge the things, the old thinking. Maybe we need to what we need to do is actually resurrect the oldest thinking, right? To move into this new paradigm that we're moving towards. So what we can do is acknowledge our debts, pay our debts. The global South is going to be suffering tremendously based on the actions of the global North has taken. And that's something that's uncomfortable. And we just need to sit with it and then figure out, how do we not make the situation worse? And in as many cases as we can, make it as good as we can.
Yeah, awesome. So this is really important. I hope anybody out there listening or watching will grab that white paper. Where is it
which
now?
which is available at associationclimateactioncoalition.com. That's a lot to remember, but it's all the words just spelled out. Or if you prefer, the letter A, the letter C, the number 3, coalition.com. So AC3coalition.com.
And it's free. Come
It's
on
free.
down. We've got
Come
nothing
on,
to
get
sell
it.
to you. Just come
And
get it, learn,
come and
and
get it.
join.
Contact Elizabeth or Shelly or Maddie if you have any questions or anything. I really think it's important. I'm so glad that you both have been able to take the time to come and talk about this. Associations are great and we can do a lot, but we can also do a lot more in the important areas that matter. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And let's do it.
Let's do it.
Excellent.
Thanks, Jefferson.
Thanks, Jefferson.